to all. In today's session, we're all going to learn about what is all about the labor market, effective market, and its pricing decisions. So let's begin the meaning of the labor market. What is all about the labor market is. Labor market is a place where both workers and the employers having an interaction with each other. In such market, mostly the employers compete to hire the best worker, and the worker compete for the best satisfying job, and that is exactly called the labor markets. When we talk about in an economy, labor market works with the demand and supply of the labor. In such market, when the demand and supply of the interact, you can see that intersect each other, that exact point is called the equilibrium point in the labor market. And automatically the demand and labor of demand and supply of labor in that particular market is influenced by a plenty of factors. It depends upon the bargaining power, it depends upon the income, it depends upon the substitute goods, it depends upon the any domestic prices in the market, and that all depends upon such factors basically influence to labor market. So automatically, to conclude the definition of labor market is just all about a place, a marketplace where the employers willing to hire the best worker in that particular market, and the workers always try to search out the best satisfying job to satisfy their own survival needs or the basic needs of their life. So that is all about the labor market. So let's focus upon the what is exactly the demand for labor under perfect competition. What would be the supply of labor under perfect competition through the graphical representations. So let's begin with the demand for labor under perfect competition. So when we talk about under perfect competition, demand for labor is called a drive demand. It means it totally depends upon the worker, that how much the workers is producing the particular output in that period of time in a market. So if let's take a scenario of you can see visiting the coffee shops and the demand for the barista coffee. So if there is an increase in demand of visiting the coffee shops, then automatically the demand for the barista coffee automatically get increased. The people who visit the coffee shops, ultimately the demand of such barista coffee will automatically goes up, and it totally depends upon the labor productivity and the price of the goods, and of course the overall revenue of the firm. So when we talk about the demand for labor, so it totally depends upon that on a particular price of the product. So in this particular scenario, when there is an increase for the visiting the coffee shops, then automatically there is an increase in the demand for the barista coffee. That means there is a positive relationship between the visiting the coffee shops and the you can say barista coffee. So let's talk about you can see how it works through the graphical representation related to this particular case. And automatically this also shows that how the demand for the barista depends on the demand for takeaway coffee. So when the takeaway coffee demand will get increased, then automatically the demand for the barista coffee will also goes up. So let's have a graphical representation for this particular scenario. And on the left side, that is the market for takeaway coffee. The graph has been shown where the demand is automatically increased, where the demand for takeaway coffee shops and visiting the coffee shops, then automatically their demand will get increased. And if the demand of takeaway coffee could get increased in the market, and automatically the barista coffee and its demand will automatically goes up. So that means there is a positive relationship between the visiting and the takeaway coffee from the shops, and automatically the demand for barista coffee also goes up. So if you look up the diagram, it shows that where the supply is also increasing and the demand is always a negative slope. And when the supply and demand intersect each other, that exact point is called the equilibrium point, that is the P1 and Q1. So when there is an increase in the takeaway coffee from the shops in the market, then automatically their demand will also get increased and shift to parallel shift to you can say D to D1, and the supply will remains the same, and as a result the quantity would get increased and the price will also get increased. If the demand is getting higher, then automatically the people would buy more and more takeaway coffee to their offices, and their particular revenue for that firm in the market will also get increased. On the other hand, demand for barista is also getting increased as the market for takeaway coffee from the shops is also increased, and ultimately it leads to the increase in the demand for coffee of barista. So if you look up the diagram on the right side where the particular you can see the demand is also getting increased for barista coffee from Q1 to Q2 and from W1 to W2. So automatically when the market for the takeaway coffee is getting increased, then automatically the demand for barista get increased, and ultimately the result is that the quantities also get increased, the wages rate of the workers is also get increased as the demand get increased. So automatically they will hire the more and more workers and get the work and increase the productivity, which ultimately gets the revenues to the firm as more as possible. So this is all about the scenario where in that particular case, the demand for barista coffee, the quantity will got to increase, the wages rate of the workers get increased so that they will receive the additional income for their to satisfy their basic humanities and the leisure activities in their life. So this is all about the scenario where the if there is an increase in the demand of the takeaway coffee from the shops in that particular market, then automatically or ultimately the demand for barista coffee will also get increased. And when we talk about the demand for barista coffee, which is also called the drive demand, which increases the quantity demanded of that particular product, that is barista coffee, and the wage rate is also getting increased from OW1 to OW2. So in case of the market, we talk about the quantities and the prices, which also goes up. And when we talk about on the other hand, the demand for barista coffee, the quantity and the wage rate also goes up. So this is exact scenario where the demand for labor, how the labor has been demanded, it depends upon the demand and supply of that particular product in the market. So this is the exact case to explain the demand for labor, that how the demand for labor has been increased. So this is the two particular here you can see examples, that is the demand for takeaway coffee and the demand for barista coffee. Now we talk about the next concept under perfect competition, that is the MRP. MRP stands for marginal revenue product of labor. When we talk about the marginal revenue product of labor, it automatically equals to the demand for labor. This is all about the economic theory, which always based on the suggestion that the demand for labor, it totally depends upon the the marginal revenue product of a worker, that how much the worker is increasing their productivity to make up or to prepare the maximum products in the and sold into the market, and ultimately the revenue would get increased. So if the additional worker would add on to prepare the product and sold into the market, and accordingly the additional revenue would earn from that, you can see additional worker, that exactly called the marginal revenue product. It means what is the exactly marginal revenue product of labor means when the company hires more and more workers or more and more laborers for to satisfy the demand of that particular product, which ultimately increases the productivity. Then if that additional workers, it's gaining more and more revenue or the additional revenue to the farm, to the company, that additional revenue is called the marginal revenue product of labor. So when we calculate the marginal revenue product of labor is equal to, mathematically it is equal to MPP into marginal revenue. When we talk about MPP, that's called the marginal physical product. It totally is, as I already told, the marginal revenue product of labor. When the company hires an additional workers, then automatically the workers' productivity could get increased if they are gaining the additional revenue to the firm. So ultimately, the MMP is always refers to the marginal physical product. That, in other words, I could say the productivity of the workers, how the productivity of workers would get increased in the particular market, and how they achieve the additional revenues to the firm, and that exactly called the marginal revenue product of labor. So when we talk about the marginal revenue, that is MR, that is called the marginal revenue of good, it totally depends upon the price. So if there is an increase in the price, then automatically the company hires the less workers and the productivity could lesser, then the additional revenue wouldn't be gained by having the same numbers of the workers who are currently or previously working in a particular firm or in a particular company. So that's why the marginal revenue, it ultimately depends on the price. So if there is a decrease in the price, then company is willing to hire the more and more workers, and ultimately the workers' productivity could get increased if they achieve or gaining the additional revenue from the market, and which always you can see satisfactory response to the firm after hiring the additional workers for that particular product. So this is exactly scenario. If you look up the diagram, so ultimately the demand for labor, the concept of demand for labor would begins, and from the demand for labor, the various three main concept is also derived, that is the marginal revenue product, marginal physical product, and the marginal revenue of good. So the formula is already given that how to calculate the marginal revenue product, and the major concepts, that is the MMP and MR is a component of the marginal revenue product of labor. So this is all about the marginal revenue product of labor. Now we talk about the various definitions, the concept of these three main terms, because these main three terms will be used in the coming upcoming slides. So when we talk about the marginal revenue product, this is an extra revenue of the firm from employing an extra worker. So when the company hires extra worker and the workers earnings an extra revenue and give to the firm, then ultimately it's called the MRP. So MRP it totally depends upon the productivity of the workers and the marginal revenue of whatever the last goods has been sold. So when we talk about the marginal physical product, that means this is for the extra output just due to the extra hiring an extra worker that helps to produce the more and more output. That is exactly called the marginal physical product. When we talk about in the microeconomics, so due to the law of diminishing returns in the short run, as as any worker who can hire any additional workers has been hired by a company, then automatically you can see their diminishing marginal product. That means the extra output of that particular worker that is willing to produce it automatically goes diminishing when a company is increasing the maximum number of employees, because in the short run it's not necessarily if the company employs more and more workers, then the marginal product, it's not necessary that every worker who is hired newly in a company, they will achieve or gain an extra revenue and gives to the firm. It's not necessarily in the long run, and that is the main reason that the marginal product goes on diminishing rate if the company hires more and more workers in the short run. So when we talk about in the long run, the marginal product would get increasing would, would be at increasing rate when the company hires the maximum numbers of workers, or when there is an increase in the number of workers. So it happens in the long run when this definition returns, this marginal product rate will get increases when more and more workers will get employed. So when we talk about the marginal revenue, what is all about the marginal revenue? This is a revenue that a firm gains from selling uh, the last unit of output. That means by selling up an additional units of output, whether whatever the units left at the end and just sold it immediately, and whatever the you can say the money that we receive, that ultimately for all the revenue as the firm gains by selling out the last unit of output or the last additional output, additional units of output, and that is exactly called the marginal revenue. But the marginal revenue is totally related to the price of whatever the last goods sold, and of course the demand for that particular good. Okay, let's say if the good increases, you can say in demand, then ultimately it influence the prices, and the firm will be willing to pay up more and more to employ the labor. So that is the main reason, the main purpose of having this concept, the marginal revenue. If the company earns more and more revenue, then ultimately the company thinks about to employ more and more labor. Why? Because to achieve or to gain the revenue of whatever the units sold at the last time by that additional workers. That is exactly called the marginal revenue. But when we talk about the demand for labor, it totally depends on the three factors. The first one is the productivity of labor. We always talk about and how much the workers and how many the workers actually working to achieve an extra revenue. That ultimately that exactly called the productivity of labor, that stands for MPP. But when we talk about the demand for the good, which always depends on the price and the marginal revenue of the last good sold, and the third one is wage rate, which is totally related to the marginal cost of the revenue. as we are talking about the wage rate, so wage rate it totally depends upon whatever the cost of additional workers of being employed by the firm. And that exactly these three factors, that is productivity, demand for a good, and the wage rate. These three factors is totally depends upon, or in other words, the demand for labor is totally depends upon these main three factors, that is the productivity of labor, demand, and wage rate. Let's take an example that based on this tabulation, based on the table where the main three concepts has been shown of a demand for labor, that is the marginal physical product, marginal revenue, and the marginal revenue of product. And the last one is marginal cost of labor. When we talk about the marginal cost of labor, it's based on the assumption that is the 360 rupees a week has been incurred, and this particular cost will remain the constant as the more and more quantities being you can say employed. So when we talk this exactly table showed, this table shows the MPP and the MRP of labor. So if you look at the table, that after employing the three workers, then automatically you can see the marginal physical product is goes on declining rate, and the marginal revenue would remains the same. And ultimately, if the marginal physical product, that means the productivity of labor goes on declining rate, then ultimately the marginal revenue of product or productivity it also goes on diminishing rate. Then that states a law in the short run, that is called the law of diminishing returns. That means that as the marginal physical product or the productivity of the labor goes on declining, then ultimately the marginal revenue of that productivity of worker will also gets declines, and in the short run, and that ultimately states the rule of the law of diminishing returns in the short run. As when we talk about the law of diminishing returns in the short run, it is the marginal cost of labor is based on the assumption that it remains the same. So let's suppose if the 360 rupees has been fixed by employing a one worker or employing the two workers. That means when we employing the another or employing a more and more workers, that means the marginal cost of labor would also remains the constant. So this is the exactly the principle of the law of diminishing returns has been followed while the company employing more and more employees, that the marginal physical product goes on declining, and if the marginal productivity, if the productivity of the workers goes on declining, then ultimately the MRP is also declining at a very slowly rate, and the marginal cost of labor, which is based on the assumption as per the theory, will remains the constant. So this is the way that how you represent in the form of a table. So this is also a graphical representation with the help of the, you can see the table of MRP, MPP, and MRP. So when we talk about how you represent the graph of marginal revenue product, that is MRP. So it totally depends. The marginal revenue product is totally depends upon the marginal physical product in the marginal cost of employing a more or extra worker by the firm. So this is a graphical representation where If you look up the curve of the marginal revenue, which goes on increasing as the more and more workers would get employed, and ultimately it reaches to a saturation point, it immediately decreases at a declining rate, and automatically it reaches to the you can say highest units. That means as the more and more workers is being extra workers and more workers is being employed by the company, then the productivity would goes declining, and if the productivity of the workers goes declining, then automatically the marginal revenue product would also goes declining at a very frequently rate. So if you look up the diagram, this particular diagram is showing the marginal revenue product of labor and the marginal cost of labor. So if you look up the horizontal line, that's called the marginal cost of labor, as in the above, in the below, in the you can say above table, it's already shown that the marginal cost of labor would remains the constant. So in the same concept has been followed up in the diagram, that the marginal cost of labor it remains constant and horizontal in line. So when the company try to maximize the profits, that means the particular firm will reach out at an equilibrium point where the marginal revenue is equals to the marginal cost of labor. So if you look up the diagram where the MRP cuts the marginal cost at a point, and that point is equal to the equilibrium point where the marginal revenue product is equal to the marginal cost. So when we talk about the marginal revenue, it means the marginal revenue of extra employer or extra worker, and the marginal cost of employing an extra worker. That exactly called the equilibrium point, where these two main determinants of the demand of labor would you can say equalize. So that point where the firms would maximize their profits. So if the company employing you can say a 6.5 worker, it doesn't make sense. That means the firm will have to employ either 6 or 7 workers so that they can equally maximize their profits by employing the more extra workers, and while employing the more extra workers so that they can maximize the revenues to the firm. That means we call the marginal revenue product as if the company is employing the extra workers, then these extra workers would increase the productivity of a particular product, and once the productivity of a particular product has been increased by these extra workers, then ultimately the marginal revenue of that particular due to the extra workers will also goes up. So whatever the value has been come up to the marginal revenue product of labor will always equals to the marginal cost of labor. And when these two are equal, that point is called the equilibrium point, and that on that point, the firms will maximize their profits. So this is the scenario graphical representation that how you draw this particular curve, that is the marginal revenue product curve, based on the fact on the one of the most important factor, that is the marginal cost of labor. So when these two curves intersect to each other, that's called an equilibrium point, and that point, these two curves are equal, and immediately the firm will maximize their profits at this particular point. Now we talk about what are those factors that influence the demand for labor. So these are the around 8 main factors which automatically influence the demand for labor. The first one is the price of the good and services. As the price will get higher, it is the more profitable for the firms to produce it, and the more and more employers will get demand. The next one is productivity of labor. As the more productive the workers are, the more and more output they can produce based on per hour, and the more labor firms will also in demand. The next one is the cost of labor. But the if the cost of a labor would get higher, then ultimately it would be you can say a less profitable for the firms to hire more workers, and ultimately the less labor would in demand. So it doesn't mean the factors that influence it would be in you can say high and low demand. It could be high demand due to the cost, due to productivity, the price, or it could be the demand, or vice versa. The next one is the cost and availability of substitutes. So the substitutes of two main variables. That is the you can take away coffee from the shops and the demand for the barista. So we are talking about basically the good substitutes. That means if there are good substitutes for labor such as capital or automations, that the firm is less likely to demand labor. So if there are good substitutes, for example, if I'm talking about the coffee, takeaway coffee from the shops, and the another is barista coffee, they are the very good substitutes, and automatically their demand is also get increased in the market, then automatically firms will try to you can say employ more and more workers. So it when the marginal cost would get involved in case of when the company needs capital, where the company needs a more and more technologies, in case of the good substitutes, then in that particular scenario, the company will less likely to demand labor. It isn't the labor, it isn't demand, but it should be the employ less and less labor, so that the particular cost and the availability of that good substitutes would always exist. The next one is the level of technology. So automatically the demand for labor is also depends upon the level of technology. If the level of technology is higher, the more productive workers would be or can be. As a result, the more and more labor firms will be in demand. The next one is level of government regulation. The more and more regulation will be imposed on the businesses, that it is very costly, very expensive to for that particular company firms to operate in, and ultimately the less labor will be employed. The next one is the level of economic activity. So the higher the level of economic activity, the more and more goods and services could be produced, and ultimately the firms will hire the extra workers as much as they can to satisfy the demand for that particular goods and services. When we talk about the factors that which influence the demand for labor, so the major concept that is demand for labor is a very complex issue, and whatever the factors which has been mentioned over here, it totally depends or varies from industry, a specific industry or a particular sector. So these factors will automatically influence demand for labor, and it depends upon a specific industry or sector as well. Now we talk about the supply of labor. So if you look up the shape of the supply of labor in that particular labor market, that is called the backward bending labor supply curve. So basically, how this decision, the supply curve, why the supply curve is backward bending in shape, it totally depends upon the consumption and the leisure activities. Now, what was the leisure activities? It depends. It refers the whatever the time available to a person when they are not working. When the worker is not working, whatever the time is available to a person, that's called the leisure time for particular activity. So when we talk about when the workers is giving up such time, that is called the leisure, the person receives the additional income and automatically it increases their consumption. On the other hand, if they are if, on other hand, it means if by not giving up the leisure time, a person will not get any additional income. That means the income effect would decline automatically and ultimately it reduces the consumption. And if, on the other hand, if we talk about by working less and less or giving up the consumption, a person enjoys the more leisure. So, there are two main cases. That if the person, a particular, giving up their leisure time, so they will get an extra income. If a person, you can see working less or giving up some consumption, so definitely they can enjoy more and more leisure time towards any extra circular activities in the particular market or in the particular organization. And that is the main reason by giving up and getting by giving up or receiving any additional income, that is the main reason that the particular supply of labor shape would be the backward bending supply curve of a labor. So if you look up the reasons that due to the substitution effect, due to the income effect, and what would be the overall effect on the supply curve of a labor. So it totally depends upon that how much the workers spend their hours, spend their time on the particular work, and so that they will get some time to enjoy the leisure, to get some activities. So automatically the wages would also get increased if they spend more and more, you can say, time on that particular work. So if you look at the supply curve, if the person, it totally depends upon the give and take policy where you can say if a person is giving up something, they will get something extra. If the person is working or giving up a consumption, so automatically they can enjoy the more and more leisure time for their extra curricular activities. So it totally depends on how much the time period a worker invests and the wage rate as well. So that is the main reason that how that this curve, the supply curve is backward bending. So if you look up the supply curve is backward bending. So look at it, it increases or it's beginning from the origin, reaches to you can say saturation point and then starts you can say increases. So if we look up the red mark, that means it shows that the workers are not willing to give up their time to spend on their leisure activity or willing to gain any additional income by giving up. So that is the main reason that substitution effect would get increased, income effect would also get increased. That means it influences the income also, it influences their substitutions also, and as a result, its overall effect on their income as well as consumption as well. But when we talk about reaches for wage rate, and it increases the wage rate that reaches to a saturation point. If you look at the green mark, that means the substitution effect would also get increases, but income effect would get decreased. That means in this particular situation where the particular the supplies reaches to a saturation point where the workers are giving up and more leisure time, and as a result they will you can say getting an additional income due to the substitute of their time, and as a result the overall impact will be positive. The next one is what after reaching a saturation point, it start increases in a very frequent rate. That means workers are actually willing to, but they cannot able to give up their time to get an extra income. Then automatically the income effect would get decreased. Substitution effect they could increase. The overall impact is negative. So that is the main reason. It only depends upon that how much the number of time, number of hours the work as the wage rate increases. So if the wage rate increases, the more and more workers come forward to work for an extra time also, which automatically influence their income either positively or negative. So this is the way that how you draw the shape of the supply of labor. So there is a reasons that the backward sloping labor supply curve is a very theoretical concept in economics. So as there is an increase in wages, that means the total amount of supplier you can see labor supply will get decreased. That means there is an inverse relationship between the wage rate and the supply of labor. As there would, if the wages would get higher, then automatically the people who are working, they will get more and more incentives, and automatically this assumption will always challenges the shape of the backward sloping supply curve. So in this particular concept, a theoretical concept, the wages would become lower. If the wages are lower just due to a backward sloping, then the individuals are more motivated to work more to meet their basic needs as well. And if the wages are rises, and ultimately the individuals opt to work more and more hours. That means if the workers work for more and more hours of the favored hours, then automatically they will get an additional income, and they will spend that additional income you can distribute more and more your activities into education, hobbies, or family care. But ultimately, when we talk about beyond the saturation point, the additional satisfaction will also harm that employers with, by getting up an extra income as compared whatever the time they spend on the leisure activities. They spending less and less time on their leisure as the value of that leisure goes declines. As if more and more workers are having an additional income, they start, you can say, they start working not on the leisure, they can start working on any other activities which always their marginal utility will always get declines, and that's why the concept is told, said that is diminishing marginal utility. Now we talk about what are those factors in the supply of labor. So we talk about the factors. It would be the domestic birth rate, it would be the immigrations rate, it would be the immigration rate, the ages, where the different categories of the people would involve in it. whether they entered into the market, labor market, or they retired from their work. So these factors will automatically affect the supply of labor, because when we talk about these factors will automatically influence or shifts the labor supply curve. So when we talk about the macroeconomic which affects the supply curve is the size of the working age population, which always influence the various factors, that is birth rate, immigration rate, the ages where the people belong to, and they are normally are working or retiring from the work. So these are the factors which ultimately influence or affect the supply of labor. So let's talk about the next concept, that is the demand for labor under imperfect competition. So if we talk about below the previous or this talking about the supply of labor under perfect competition. But now in this particular slide, I'm talking about the demand for labor under imperfect competition. So if you look up the imperfect competition, the shape of the demand curve is always downward sloping. If you look up the why it is downward sloping, it is based on the total revenue and the marginal revenue curves. And if you look up the revenue schedules and the cost schedules, so the quantity, as the more and more you can see the workers will get employed, so automatically the prices of that particular product will also get declines, and ultimately what would be the total revenue that the price quantity that is goes on increasing. But unfortunately, the marginal revenue, that is its delta in by delta Q, that is quantity. So if you look up the delta DR, what would be the difference? That means that is 44 minus 0, it becomes 44 by 1. The difference of quantity is 1, and the difference of total revenue, it would be in the second worker, that is the difference of MR would be the 30 by 1, 30, 19 by 1, it would be by 19, same and so on. So if you look at the shape of the marginal revenue, it's automatically a very decline, it start diminishing at a very frequent rate and becomes negative. So that is the main reason that due to the marginal revenue, it is declining and becomes negative, and as a result, any demand any demand curve facing a typical farm, it would be you can say any imperfect you can see competitive farm, then the shape of the demand curve, it's downward sloping. That means employment of any additional worker, it leads to a rise in output, and that is the basic concept actually. That if the particular employment rate is higher, the company will hire more and more workers, and ultimately they will sell whatever the quantities of a product at a very low price, and ultimately it gains revenues to the firm. When we talk about the revenues, this is a way that how you tabularize the revenues of the firm irrespective of the cost, as the particular revenues and costs are always interrelated to each other, and depends whether the particular company would hire more and more workers or not. So cost is always plays a very significant role when we try to pull out the demand under imperfect competition. So if you look up the schedules, there is always come up a concept that MR is falling at a very faster rate than the average revenue or the price. If you look up the price and the marginal revenue, the price is you can declining is a very you can say slower rate, but as compared to the marginal revenue. So to conclude this revenue schedule, the marginal revenue is diminishing at a very faster rate than the price, which always equal to the average revenue. How to calculate the marginal revenue product of labor, that is the marginal revenue into marginal physical product. So if the marginal revenue starts declining at a very faster rate, then automatically the MRP, that means marginal revenue product of labor, will also declines at a very faster rate. In that sense, the you can say uh, VMP, that is the marginal product of labor, is also equals to the price and the marginal product. Now, question arises is when these two curves would intersect each other, what would be the result? What would be the outcome? So automatically, when the marginal revenue is declining at a very faster rate, then automatically the marginal physical product will also be decreased at a very faster rate. In that particular sense, when the marginal physical product of labor would decline at a very faster rate, then what would be the outcome? That means the VMP, that is the value of the marginal product, is equal to the price into marginal product. And when these two curves intersect, that is V value of marginal product and the marginal revenue of product of labor, then what would be the outcome? This would be the outcome in the next slide. This is the result. So the result is when these two curves will intersect each other, which has been shown on the wage rate, then ultimately the demand and supply of labor will also get influenced by these two factors. That is the marginal revenue of you can say product of labor and the value of marginal product. So when we talk about the competitive conditions of the labor market, or depending upon the conditions of the labor market, any firm could hire as more and more workers wherever it necessary in a growing or whatever or at a at an ongoing wage rate. So this in that particular case, the supply curve of a labor for the firm will become horizontal. So if you look up the shape of the supply curve of labor will become horizontal in that particular scenario where the marginal revenue it declines at a very faster rate, and then what would be the shape of the value of marginal product and the marginal revenue of product of labor. So in that case, definitely they intersect each other, but and on the y-axis, but automatically it declines and cuts the supply curve of a labor. That means the value of marginal product will be a demand curve of labor for the firm, which is operating in a competitive market. Then the demand for labor is represented by the marginal product of you can see product of labor. So this is the case where the original demand will depends upon the value of marginal product in a very competitive firm, whereas the demand for labor is represented by the marginal revenue product of labor. So by comparing these two situations, or comparing these two curves, whatever the wage rate paid by the both firms will remains the same. Why it remains the same? Because the both curves is automatically declining and intersects the same supply curve. That means the wage rate, whatever they are paying to the workers at a rate that remains the same, that is OW. But if we talk about the quantity supply, that means the demand and supply of labor, that means the demand would get a little change in this particular concept. When we talk about a competitive firm will employ the OLC, where the value of marginal product has been shown, where the particular competitive firm will stop this demand for labor. They will not hire more and more workers. But when we talk about the marginal revenue of labor, it totally depends. In this particular scenario, if the competitive firm is not hiring any new or extra workers, then automatically their demand will reach out from OLC to OL1, as the marginal revenue is also declines at a very you can say faster rate, and it totally depends upon the two factors, that whether the competitive firm is higher in favor and workers, that means that ultimately they will produce a smaller output, but it depends upon the two factors, that is the size of the plant and the state of technology which will be used by the competitive firms. So to conclude this diagram, it totally depends upon the shapes of the value of marginal product of labor and the marginal revenue product of labor. So if the company is not hiring any extra workers, that means the particular firm will be demand of labor would be the OLC, and ultimately if the company hires the more and more extra workers, then ultimately their demand of labor would get you can see increase. That means there would be a shift of the parallel curve of the value of marginal product of labor to the value of marginal product of labor by employing an additional workers. So in that case, the demand will also get increased. In this particular case, in this particular diagram, the supply curve will remain constant. Both the curves, that is the MRP and the VMP of labor, will decline at a very faster rate, and ultimately the company has stopped to hire the extra employers or extra workers. And if the firm is hiring any less workers or any favor workers, then it totally depends upon the choice of whether they would produce the higher output or the lower output. And it depends on two factors mainly, that is the size of the plant and the state of technology which are used by the competitive firms. So this is the exact scenario, that how the two main curves through the schedules has been derived, and it has been shown through the graphical representation. That means if the marginal revenue is declining, then the value of the marginal product is also declining at a very faster rate. And if the value of marginal product is start declining, then automatically the marginal revenue product of labor will also start declining and intersect the constant supply curve and with their respective, you can say, demand of labor, that is LC, OLC, and OL1. And whatever the equilibrium points has been achieved through the interaction of the supply curve and the revenue and the marginal product curves, that will be the OMEM and EC equilibrium points at the same wage rate, that is OW. So this is the overall graphical representation of the two main curves which has been derived from the marginal revenue, you can see schedule, and as well as the price, which is always equal to the average revenue schedules. Now we talk about the supply of labor under imperfect competition. So automatically when we talk about the supply of labor under imperfect competition, it totally depends upon the market supply of labor. As the supply of labor is not affected by the fact that the firms will be a monopolistic or any bargaining power or any monopolistic power in the market. In fact, the supply of labor is totally depends upon the markets and how many firms has been say supplied various quantities of the product. And automatically, when we talk about the supply curve of labor, that in case of individual firm, then automatically the shape of the supply curve would be the perfectly elastic or horizontal in shape. That means it means that whatever the companies hire, more and more extra workers, supply would remain the same of the labor at the same wage rate. But when we talk about the market supply of labor in the market, then automatically once the companies hire more and more workers in the market, the wages will also get increased. That means supply of labor in the market in positive related to each other, or we can say a positive sloped between the wages and the number of workers of the firm. But in case of the individual, it is a horizontal, perfectly elastic. So when we talk about the market supply of labor, it is a horizontal, it is a summation of all the supply curves of the individual households. But when we talk about in case of individual, it is a horizontal, perfectly elastic. So this is the shapes of the supply of labor perfect competition, which categorized into two parts, market and the individual firm. Supply labor market policies, there are basically the one of the policy, that is minimum wage laws. This law has been referred a wage rate where the employers must pay to their workers. The minimum wages are very useful for the low skilled workers. So whatever the mechanism has been formed by the government regarding the minimum wages or its effect can be understood using a particular diagram as well. So this is a diagram here when we talk about employment case. So automatically the demand and supply would always intersect with each other. So where the minimum wage has been derived, that minimum wage is always solve the gap of unemployment case where the particular the company would employ more and more workers, but at a minimum wage should also give the low skilled workers, which is being denoted by a term that is called N. That is an equilibrium point, and this point shows a level of employment of the workers for such particular law, that is called the minimum wage law. So minimum wage law is always concept is drive to fill up the gap of the unemployment, and so that on this particular wage rate the workers will get at least minimum wage for especially the low skilled categories of the workers. So at this minimum wage, the number of people who wants job will always exceeds the number of workers where the employers are willing to hire. and that actually all the unemployment, the people are actually want to work but they don't get a job at a minimum wage also. So that's it for today. Thank you for listening this lecture. I will come up to more and more interesting topics related to this particular blog. Till time, have a good day and namaste to all.